Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton rakaman agenda Awani khas kerana Malaysia buat pertama kalinya bertuah diberi peluang untuk menganjurkan mesyuarat ataupun pertemuan ahli-ahli lembaga penasihat sains kepada Ketua Eksekutif tertinggi PBB, iaitu Ban Ki-moon. Dalam aspek ini, saya ingin berbicara dalam bahasa Inggeris. I would like to welcome my two very honoured guests for today. Just telling the audience of how we're very honoured in this country to have the first ever SAB meeting in this country. And nearest to me is Dr. Tanya Abrahamse from South Africa. You are the CEO of South African National Biodiversity Institute member, Future Earth Transition Team. But you know, if I read your bio, you've been many things. You've overseen tourism for South Africa. You look at empowerment of communities. I'll come back to that. But you also very qualified scientist on your subject matter. And then, of course, I do have Professor Abdullah Daar. Thank you so much for making time. There's a lot of things to say about you, but you are the Professor of Public Health Sciences and of Surgery, University of Toronto, apart from other hats that you wear. But I guess today, in this particular discussion, I want to draw out the importance of having science being used as a very important component of any policy making initiatives. And we do know that this is 2015, there's the Millennium Development Goals before, but what's post 2015, since it's ending soon in terms of time. So what have we learned from the MDGs that we can bring forward to SDGs? However, at the grassroots level, how many people even care that MDG is coming to an end, for example, because in their daily life it doesn't appear to them as this is MDG, but it might be concretely inside the MDG initiative. So if we were moving forward for the SDGs, I want to start with you coming into the picture of the importance of science in policy, but through the transition from MDGs going toward the Sustainable Development Goals for post-2015. If you can start.
Well, the Millennium Development Goals were interesting. It's like the first time that that the UN pulled together a kind of vision for the globe about what we want to have as a people. And so it was a major achievement. But it had its naturally, first time pioneer approach. It had its shortcomings. It was, and it's not being abandoned. It is really the matters that arose through the Millennium Development Goals still pertain. But I think there was a general view that development is broader, that it is in the social sphere, in the economic sphere, in the political sphere, in the cultural sphere, and that it needs a more complex look. And that's what the Sustainable Development Goals are doing. I mean, one of the things we also want to do is be very clear about what it is we want to achieve in each of those goals. Okay. And for me, and I'm sure Professor Daar's as additional views, for me, one of the things we must ride on the surf of a wave, or the wave of a surf, is the information technology revolution. It is the fastest moving sector. It touches the hearts of 11-year-olds and 90-year-olds, as you know. It's in languages of all over the country. It is amazingly innovative and amazingly able to contact people that normally we couldn't. I mean, in South Africa, for example, everybody has got a cell phone. We almost have everybody with internet access because of the spread of cell phone technology. So that we would be stupid not to use this new wave of human ingenuity and innovation to, one, communicate with people about what we want to do in the Sustainable Development Goals, but more important really, to get from them their activity, their effort and energy into achieving it. And I think for me those are the two things that are different. One is the use of technology, and two, that technology allows us to harness much more information and to be able to give access to much more people because of that. And that's the difference, I think, in the last 15 years.
Prof. Abdullah.
If I can just pick up from there, one of the best definition of what science is reliable knowledge. Reliable knowledge, of course, depends on reliable information, and that depends on reliable data. And so it's linked. The difference between MDGs and SDGs is MDGs were top-down, SDGs is much more ambitious and so a little more messy, and it was from the bottom up, communities coming up with ideas, different stakeholders, and so the end result is going to be based on the realities of the world, on the one hand. The other is that there has been already a fair amount of buy-in by communities.
Okay.
And that means that communities are going to be more interested and therefore more engaged, and they are going to demand to be empowered. And although one thinks of communities as people in villages, and so they are not sophisticated scientists, but if they demand the right to monitor, if they demand the right to implement, then they are doing scientific work, and science will underlie their decision making whether you like it or not. And so science and SDGs are going to be completely organically interlinked, if you think about it. And what our scientific advisory board has been looking at includes, for example, the work that has been led by Tanya here on the data revolution with other people in that team. And the emphasis has been, let's not allow a divide to occur where data is concerned, like a divide had occurred with the digital revolution. For a long time, luckily until cell phones came, suddenly there is less inequity and inequality of access to the internet. In the same way, we do not want to see a divide with the data revolution. And going forward, there's going to be a huge data revolution. We need to think about harmonization of data platforms, certain ways of interpreting them, thresholds where action is called upon, ways of using the data to underpin policy. All those things have to be thought of, and if that became a West-driven, North-driven exercise where we in the South are consumers and not creators, that's not going to be a happy world in the future.
Grow ASEAN will provide a unique platform and promote intra-ASEAN tourism by world-class infrastructure.
Bisnes Awani Plus, 5 berita mingguan terbaik, berbagai perspektif, ekonomi dan urus niaga pilihan.
Our core business is not ground handling or call centers or flight academies.
Still finding the right concept that the market will be more receptive.
Setiap Sabtu,
Bisnes Awani Plus,
6.30 petang di Astro Awani.
Hi, you are still watching a special recording of Agenda Awani. The world is facing a lot of complex challenges, but we have to rise to meet them, and science is a very important component of what we do. The question I asked before.
So you asked about science. I'm a strong believer in the democratization of science. So it's not just a one way. It's not just saying to politicians they must listen to science. We must also, first of all, produce the results of science, always evidence-based, always unbiased, but results in a way that politicians can grapple with. And for many years, I think that we live in an ivory tower. So we need to democratize science, so we've also got things to move. The other thing about science is that it's not an elitist activity. And that science and basic science, if you would want to call it, a science approach, a spirit of science, that needs to be inculcated from primary school to high school to university, that all of us can do science, and that we can develop citizen science who understand the notion or develop the notions of unbiased research and evidence-based research. And it is possible. And I think that science itself needs to improve its ways to do that. That when you have an informed society who understands the notion of unbiased information, evidence-based information, then I think policy and approaches will gradually be better, because it will be based on what you see, how you've measured, all the aspects of science.
For that to happen,
So I think for me, we have an elitist view about
Okay.
who a scientist
Okay.
is and what a scientist does. And I think that will be, for all of us, we need to see how we can just grow the numbers of ordinary people who do science.
is it also about outcomes? If science or scientific communities can come to answer the needs of now, for example, mitigation of disaster, finding a missing plane, even if we don't find them, we trust that this is the best science that we have around and is being utilized to find these answers. At least,
I think that's been one of the problems that we also must look at as a science community, that we don't share information, that there's information out there that can be shared, and only when they're coordinated and shared will you overcome some of those issues. So I'm sure Professor Daar will tell you a little bit about some of the work we're doing around looking at a problem and saying how do you resolve this problem better, and creating an approach and a spirit that we want to advise the Secretary General of the United Nations to make a sea change in the way we have access to information, access to science, and so that we can resolve some of those issues. But I wanted to just say, I don't want to be in a case where we just blame the other side. I think as scientists, we also must get our house in order in terms of sharing information, being more open, having much more collaboration, because science is universal and is transformative, and I think that's the path we need to go on. And I think that's also what's different in the SDGs, the role of science and the universality of science measurement and monitoring and even solutions making is something that the SDGs is
solution making and bringing it as relevant as it can be to the layman on the ground. Professor Abdullah.
So one of the things that the Secretary General asked us a few months ago was to identify big concerns for the future of the planet and its people, and identify those for him so that he can raise them to the global level in terms of finding responses within and without the UN system, within and beyond the UN system. And I want to first of all make a point that if you put minds together and mine them in a fair and objective way, you would be amazed at the outcomes or the results you would get. Much better than if one person thinks that that person knows all the answers in the world. So this idea of crowdsourcing of great ideas. So we did this exercise using a Delphi method, which is a structured way, it's very scientific, of getting people to send in their ideas and then other members voting on those ideas and scoring them, and you do that iteratively until you arrive at a certain number of those ideas that then are the collective wisdom of that group. And so we've come up with 8 of these ideas that we're still shaping, which we will send to the Secretary General at the end of June. But one of them is about our oceans, and we don't really realize how much we depend on our oceans for oxygen, for fish, for transportation, for rain, for millions of people. They are directly dependent on oceans, and millions of people indirectly dependent on oceans. And the question is, going forward, how do you want to look after those oceans and create what's known as a blue economy in a responsible and sustainable way? So that's one of the ideas. The others, I won't go into detail, but biodiversity is a big subject now. our group has identified threats to biodiversity and how in the future we should be better stewards. And one of the key things that our members are saying is that in terms of monitoring, in terms of governance, this should be devolved to communities and not run by central big organizations that become bureaucratic. Responsibility should reside at the local level. Thirdly, we've heard, and this is very easy to understand, the Ebola crisis recently. Yes. And this could happen again. And the world is not yet prepared to address that kind of issue of infectious diseases. On the one hand, we are running out of antibiotics. On the other hand, we need to be prepared if there is a big crisis. So that was one of the other things that our group came up with. Then taking basics, foundational science seriously. Okay. So a lot of countries do science and technology, but not foundational science as well as others. And our group is saying that in order for sustainable development to be driven by all the countries of the world, we need to invest in foundational science. And then just one word with each of the others. Sure. We need to have better predictive models for tsunamis, for example. We need to change the fossil fuel paradigm and think about emissions-free technologies. We have the technology and the money to make every human being have access to clean water, but it's still not happening. It's a shame on us. We need to sort that out. And finally, the world is consuming resources very inequitably and putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere very inequitably. And we need to think about how we can improve that.
Dia kata dia nak resign. Mahathir tidak berbohong.
Awani 745 sentiasa membawakan anda berita-berita terkini, komprehensif, tak kira di mana anda berada.
The immediate one, we may consider taking them in between Indonesia and Malaysia.
We are not a destination country, right? We are transiting country.
So you'll take them in and put them in a place?
Temporarily.
Kalau ada maklumat-maklumat yang boleh membantu pasukan keselamatan, bekerjasama dengan kami.
Awani 745, the Astro Awani.
It's a new project. True intelligence, a machine that can think and feel.
Can't be. What in the name of the Lord? He's got to be removed.
Destroy that robot. Burn it to ash.
Want to live?
You want to survive, champion. Champion must fight.
I am consciousness. I am alive. I am champion.
Untuk menempah saluran 481.
I think that, first of all, the Science Advisory Board is not only just natural scientists or medical scientists or physicists or engineers. There's a historian there, there's a social sciences person, there's a governance type person. So we certainly do not regard science as just being the natural sciences or the hard sciences. I don't know what the right word is these days. But we really do believe that the problems within sustainable development is not just whether we use the forests right or whether we pump out carbon dioxide, but it's a lot about culture, about art, about the human spirit, and we can talk further about that. And I think I agree with you that we try to balance, because in developing countries maybe we don't have enough mathematicians and scientists and engineers, and then we go on to that path. And we neglect those artists and the softer sciences. But I do believe in this new century that the issues around leisure and pleasure and education and art and culture is what's going to be our saving grace. And so it's a difficult concept to grapple with, but I do believe that.
Can you give us, because I personally haven't experienced a balance of discussion where we have the natural sciences and the other side together. But I'm sure in the SAB meets, you have experienced that when you discuss all at one time.
Yes,
and can you
do.
please share, how do you do that? Because that covers almost the entire range of the power of humanity.
You know, we just have to multitask. This is a complex world,
Yes.
you know. You've got, you know, IT growth, you've got Google, you've got all sorts of things impounding on you. You still want to keep family together, you still want to have social cohesion, you still want to deal with different groupings of people. That's life, you know, and it's a complex life. You must just deal with it, in my view.
It's doable within the SAB?
Of course it's doable. Of course it's doable. In the SAB, we've got people who really have worked a lot with indigenous knowledge, for example, very interesting. And then we've got a historian there, a very eminent historian, talking about history and culture.
And you can match all
anthropology.
expectations.
Yes, I think we must, because sustainable, well, first of all, life is complex, so live with it.
Yes.
Secondly of all, if you want to do sustainable development, you can't see it in a silo of one thing or the other. So you must live with that complexity. So I don't know if you agree with that. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm a member of the UNESCO International Bioethics Committee.
Okay.
So I bring that sensitivity to my work in the Scientific Advisory Board, in addition to my science capacity. There are several people in our group who I'm sure have taught bioethics. Then we have other people like the historians you've heard about, people who are thoughtful in a humanistic way in the humanities, and it is possible. Now, does everybody in the world have the capacity to do that? If you go to meetings, will you find people with both? It's rare, but it's doable, and I think there are certain fundamental things that you need to put forth at the beginning. So first of all, and you hinted on this, we live on a small planet, and we are consuming resources very rapidly. And if we don't begin to change our habits, then we're going to destroy life on Earth, right? So it's a matter of thinking, what is the time scale? And time scale is about responsibility. Because if all you think about is this month, and don't think about your future generations. So for example, the native Indians of North America, they don't make important decisions. They only make important decisions after thinking 7 generations forward. So they worry about 7 generations forward. Imagine if we all thought like that. Secondly, I think that with all the great talents that we have as human beings, the one that is least developed is the talent to listen to each other. We need to listen to each other without suspicion, with humility. We need to understand that as one species, we will either survive together or we will be destroyed together. If we listen to each other and we don't say, this guy, he's a Christian, I'm a Muslim, so at the beginning I'm suspicious. I don't need to be. These are people who have all been created by one creator. That creator, I doubt very much if he or she distinguishes between Christians and Muslims. I think that creator thinks of all the people he or she has put on earth as people he loves or she loves. And therefore, the humility should arise on the fact, it should be premised on the fact that we are all equal, we are all vulnerable, we are all capable of love, and we should be listening to each other and finding common solutions to our common problems. It's a very difficult lesson, but if we start at primary school, we can succeed.
I want to end with, if the reports and recommendations by the Scientific Advisory Board to the Secretary General includes all this, so it might also mean that there will be a relook at how the United Nations itself is structured. Because sometimes when we listen to the political argument, it's like this. But then when we go to the General Assembly and listen, it's like it's encompassing others. So would that happen too in the recommendation?
Look, any institution that's built by human beings will never be perfect. You have to accept that. What you have to say to yourself is, after how long do we stop and reform? So the United Nations, a lot of people realize it requires reform. The United Nations is not perfect. But I ask you another question. Could we live today with all the complexities we have without something like the United Nations? No, we would have to recreate something if we destroyed it. So the question is, how do we reform it when in fact there are powers that are not going to agree to those reforms, but we have to continuously push and pressurize to bring about reform at the United Nations. We have to.
Thank you so much, Professor and Doctor, for making time to be. There's never enough time with great people. I guess the lesson learned is it's not a zero-sum game. It's not just black and white, but something grey in between. And as long as we're looking at it
and
holistically,
red and green and blue,
red and green and yellow and whatever else, at the end of the day, like the Director General of UNESCO, Excellency Rina Bokova, said, maybe people on ground want to see the political will to execute and bring to implementation all the great deliberations of the SABs. We'll wait for September. We'll see the implementation after that. And I'm sure your contributions will be remembered long after all of the deliberations.
Very kind.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having had the third meeting in Malaysia. Terima kasih banyak kepada anda telah menonton. Hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri kepada pelbagai platform yang Astro Awani ada, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube dan sebagainya. Dan kita akan berjumpa lagi dalam episod Agenda Awani yang lain. Boleh sekian. Selamat malam dan terima kasih. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Very, very great interview. Yeah.